I've always enjoyed sharing moments of my life on Instagram, but everything started to change about 3 weeks ago. I live in a bustling city, full of lights and sounds that never seem to rest. One day, after posting a photo of the park where I usually run, a strange comment caught my attention. It was from a profile with no picture, called a Dark 404, and the comment was a sequence of characters that seemed encrypted between numbers and letters, something like, "Not everything that shines is within reach." At first, I ignored it, but these comments began to appear on every new photo I posted. Each message was a riddle or code, increasingly disturbing, and strangely, they started to include personal details about me that I had never shared online. Things like the color of my new shirt, my dog's name, even the fact that I had lost my apartment keys the previous week. Tension began to build up inside me, turning my daily routine into a series of cautious glances over my shoulder and growing fear. My friends, upon learning of the situation, were divided between those who thought it was just a tasteless prank and those who were concerned for my safety. After trying to ignore the messages for another week, I finally decided to go to the police. There, a detective became interested in the case but warned that without more information, he could do little. I felt frustrated and vulnerable, trapped in a web that seemed to be closing in around me. As the comments became increasingly invasive, I felt that ignoring or waiting was no longer an option. I decided then that I would confront that user, hoping to find answers and put an end to the constant fear that plagued me. I chose a public meeting, thinking that the presence of other people could offer me some security. I determined it would be in the same park where it all started, an open place frequented by many during the day, which gave me a sense of safety. I sent a direct message to @Dark404, challenging them to meet me. To my surprise, they quickly agreed, setting the date and time. In the days leading up to the meeting, I prepared myself mentally and physically. I shared the details with 2 close friends, asking them to stay at a distance, watching in case something went wrong. I also informed the detective who was handling the case, who advised me to keep the meeting in a public place and to report any new developments. On the morning of the meeting, the sky was clear, but my stomach was in knots. I arrived at the park early, sitting on a bench where I could see the paths leading there. Every person who passed by me was a potential @Dark404, and my heart raced with every glance that met mine. As the appointed time approached, I noticed someone wearing a hood, standing out among the park's usual visitors. That person was walking slowly in my direction, and I could feel every beat of my heart echoing in my ears. However, before they could reach me, the figure simply turned and left the park. My phone vibrated. It was a message from @Dark404. "It's not safe. Look under the benches." Trembling, after searching for a while, I found an envelope with my name written on it. Inside, there were several photos of me, taken without my knowledge over the past few weeks, and a note that said, "Now you see, be careful." At that moment, I understood that the danger was real and closer than I could ever imagine. As I read the note, I panicked. The feeling of being watched, which was once just an uncomfortable suspicion, became a terrifying reality. The photos showed me at various moments of my daily life, always from a distance, as if someone was constantly following me without being noticed. It was evident that @Dark404 wasn't just an online stalker. They were physically close, observing every one of my steps. The message, "Now you see, be careful," stuck in my mind as I ran out of the park. I called my friends, who were nearby, and asked them to meet me immediately. They arrived within minutes, and together we decided to go straight to the police station. The detective who received the envelope and the photos finally seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. He organized a team to start monitoring my house and the areas I frequented, hoping to catch the stalker. Meanwhile, I could barely sleep, I was afraid of everything around me, even turning off the sounds of notifications on my phone to avoid further scares. The following days were a mix of paranoia and fear. The police couldn't find who was behind the @dark404 profile, and I began to feel increasingly isolated and vulnerable. I decided I needed to do something to end this once and for all. I arranged a new meeting, this time in a more controlled location, with police surveillance from a distance. I sent the message challenging my stalker, but this time, instead of a park, I chose a cafe in the city center, with security cameras and plenty of activity. On the day of the meeting, the cafe was crowded, and I sat with my back to the wall, able to see all the entrances and exits. Minutes passed slowly, and every person who entered seemed suspicious. Then my phone vibrated. It was a message from @dark404. "Look at the table," pointing to a specific table, one that I was sure was empty when I arrived. There was only an envelope similar to the one I found in the park and an old phone on top of it. With my heart in my mouth, I opened the envelope. Inside, there was a single sheet with a handwritten message. "You will never be alone again." The phone beside it rang, and when I answered, I heard heavy breathing before the line went silent. At the same instant, a notification appeared. The @dark404 account had been deleted. I stood there, holding the paper and the phone, not fully understanding, but feeling a strange mix of relief and terror. Someone had toyed with my life, watched me closely, and now apparently had decided to disappear. Since I started drawing, I've always been fascinated by the power of visual storytelling. At 19, my room is a true artistic studio. Shelves filled with comics, brushes and pens scattered everywhere, and a large drawing table occupying the center of the room. This is my sanctuary, my creative space where I breathe life into characters and stories that I share with the world through my Instagram. The window in my room offers a view of the bustling city, but it's here, in this small and chaotic space, that I feel most connected to the outside world. Over the past few months, my Instagram profile has begun to gain prominence. Not only other artists, but also comic fans started following my work, leaving comments and sharing my posts. The interaction has always been positive and motivating, until one day, a new follower, whom I'll call Grace, began to stand out among the rest. Her comments were always flattering, sometimes overly so, considering the short time she had been following my page. Grace seemed to have a special admiration for my work, or perhaps, as I would later discover, for me. I'll be honest, at first it was flattering to receive so much attention from someone who seemed truly enchanted by my talent. But Grace's messages quickly became more personal and intense. "You're amazing. I feel like I really know you just by seeing your drawings," she wrote once. Ignoring the red flags, I continued to share my life and work, unaware that every detail I shared was inadvertently painting a map straight to my door. The situation began to get really weird when Grace went from being a fan to an obsessive figure. Private messages with invitations to meet up, which I politely declined, evolved into declarations that she couldn't live without me. At the time, I had no idea how literal those words would become. One day, the situation escalated in a way I could never have predicted. Grace sent a message saying, "I needed to see you, so I decided today is the day." Those words sent chills down my spine. "What do you mean, decided today is the day?" I had been clear about keeping our relationship strictly professional, even in our online interactions. I replied, trying to keep calm, "Grace, I appreciate your support of my work, but I think there's a misunderstanding here. I'm not comfortable with this." She didn't reply. Hours passed, and her silence was more terrifying than any message she could have sent. Night fell, and with it a storm fitting to my state of mind. Lightning cut through the sky as I tried to focus on a new drawing, trying to push away the growing anxiety. It was almost midnight when I heard knocks on the door. Not one, but several, fast and urgent. My heart raced. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice faltering. "It's me, Grace. Please, we need to talk. I love you, and I know you feel something for me too." Frozen in fear, I backed away. The idea that she had found out where I lived was terrifying. I hadn't shared my address with her, so how? The answer came quickly, a sudden memory of a live stream where I showed a package I received, unaware that the address was visible. Fighting panic, I rushed to the phone and called my neighbor, Mr. Hernandez, a robust and always attentive man. I explained the situation quickly. As I waited for his arrival, the knocks on the door became more insistent. "Open the door, please. I just want to see you." Grace's voice was filled with emotion, but all I felt was fear. Before I could respond, I heard the front door open abruptly. Mr. Hernandez had arrived, not a moment too soon. "Stay behind me," he murmured, heading for the door with calm determination. I followed him, my heart pounding loudly against my chest. Grace was there, standing under the streetlight, completely drenched by the rain, her hair plastered to her face. Her expression was a mix of desperation and anger, her eyes fixed on me as if only I could fix what was broken inside her. "Grace, you need to go home." Mr. Hernandez spoke firmly, but with a hint of compassion. "It's not right what you're doing. If you don't leave, we'll call the police." She looked at him, then at me, anger giving way to a kind of profound sadness. "I just wanted to be with you," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought you could understand me, that you could see me for real." I didn't know what to say. The whole situation was surreal, a nightmare that I hoped to wake up from at any moment. I just nodded, unable to find the right words that could ease her pain without encouraging her further. After a few tense moments, Grace finally turned and walked away, disappearing into the rainy night. Mr. Hernandez assured me that he would keep an eye out for any suspicious activity and return to his home. I was left alone, trembling, not just from the cold, but from the visceral fear that this experience had awakened in me. The police arrived minutes later, alerted by Mr. Hernandez. I explained everything that had happened, showing them the messages and recounting the online interaction that had gone so terribly far. They promised to monitor the situation and talk to Grace, ensuring that she understood the consequences of her actions. I'm a 24-year-old freelance photographer. Currently, I live in a small apartment in the city center, a place I chose for its proximity to various picturesque locations perfect for my photo shoots. My work and my passion for photography have led me to share my life and my portfolio on Instagram, a platform I've always considered safe and a gateway to professional opportunities. Like any young social media user, I regularly receive a flood of likes, comments, and new followers. However, about a month ago, I began to notice a strange pattern. New comments started appearing, initially complimentary, but quickly becoming disturbing and intensely personal. They detailed not only what I wore in my photos, but also my routines and places I frequented. I tried to ignore them at first, attributing them to some obsessive admirer who would eventually tire out. But with each post I made, the comments grew in frequency and in a threatening tone. Fear began to take hold of me, especially when I realized that some of the information shared had never been posted online. Someone was watching me not just virtually, but in the real world too. The environment of my own neighborhood, once a refuge, turned into a cage of anxiety and paranoia, where every face could be a threat. The messages became daily, some even detailing the color of the blouse I wore that morning. The feeling of being constantly watched began to affect my daily routine. I reduced my visits to cafes and parks, places where I used to seek inspiration for my photographs. I decided to take more serious measures. I changed the privacy settings of my accounts, but this didn't stop the flow of messages. It was as if, somehow, the stalker knew more about me than I did myself. With a growing fear that this situation could escalate to a physical confrontation, I sought out the police. The officers advised me to collect as much evidence as possible. I began documenting every online interaction, every comment, every direct message. This process, though necessary, only amplified my anguish. I felt as if every step I took was being timed and judged by an invisible observer. At night, the noise of the cars outside seemed more sinister, and every sound made me think that someone could be approaching. My home, once my last refuge, no longer felt safe. I began to notice small details. A shadow moving differently behind the curtain, my neighbor's delay in locking the door. Paranoia was taking over, turning every moment into a scene from a psychological thriller where I was the involuntary protagonist. The escalation of events reached a critical point on a Wednesday night. I had returned from a meeting with clients and, upon entering my apartment, I noticed something that froze my heart. A photo of me, taken from afar as I walked down the street, was printed and left under the door. There was no written message, just the black and white image, my figure standing out in the crowd, looking distractedly at something outside the frame. The worst part was knowing that this photo had been taken recently. The fear I felt at that moment was indescribable. I was being watched so closely that someone had managed to approach my building without me noticing. With trembling hands, I called the police once again, reporting the incident. They came quickly and began to investigate. The urgency of the situation was now clear, and they decided to trace the IP addresses of the messages I received, something I didn't have the technical knowledge to do on my own. Meanwhile, I spent the night awake, jumping at every sound. My mind imagined scenarios where my stalker would finally decide to do more than just watch and send photos. The next day, I received a call from the police with news that made me feel a mixture of relief and horror. The IP addresses of the messages had been traced to a neighbor in my own building, a man I greeted in the elevator, who smiled and asked about my day. The police arrested him after finding evidence of his obsession in his apartment. Photos of me, notes about my schedules. Knowing that my stalker wasn't a stranger, but someone who was so close, made me question every interaction I've ever had.